It is a truth universally acknowledged, though perhaps more often regretted than observed, that a man who whistles at funerals is either mad, malicious, or inappropriately fond of minor keys. The inhabitants of Fenchurch St. Abel, a flint-stitched village with more secrets than soil, were inclined to believe the latter of Mr. Sylvester Damper, who had been seen, not once but thrice, pursing his cracked lips into a tuneless strain as coffins passed beneath the yew. He was not a choir member, though he had once installed the vicar's new harmonium. He lived alone in the gardener's cottage, and was known to eat kippers with mustard, which already set him at odds with English orthodoxy. It was this very Mr. Damper who, on a gruel silver morning in late October, was discovered lying face down. In the nave of St. Abel's, his fingers clutched around a snapped tuning fork, and the corners of his mouth twisted in what might generously be called a smirk. The sexton, a man of granite principles and pebble-thick spectacles, declared the body cold and the soul beyond retrieval. The vicar attempted a half-hearted absolution, tripped over a hassock, and then quietly returned to the vestry to rewrite his sermon on wrath. The local constabulary, in the form of Sergeant Griggs, a man who took tea with vinegar if it was nearer than the sugar, pronounced the death peculiar but surely natural, since there was no blood, nor bludgeon, nor sign of a burglar. The tuning fork was presumed to be symbolic, or failing that, eccentric. Mr. Damper had been, after all, a musical type, in the way barn owls are bookish. It was at this most uncertain of junctures that Lord Peter Wimsey arrived, uninvited and unapologetic, having taken the wrong train and, by his own admission, entirely the right one if one is to believe in narrative structure. He disembarked at Fenchurch St. Abel, not to investigate a death, but to visit an ailing school friend of dubious scholarship and excellent port, only to find the friend departed to a sanatorium and the port reduced to cooking sherry. Wimsey, who never missed a chance to turn misfortune into deduction, inquired after village oddities at the local inn, the Dead Fox and Feather, and within 15 minutes was leaning over the unfortunate Mr. Damper with a frown that suggested intellectual titillation rather than sympathy. He died in the church, Wimsey inquired, examining the posture of the corpse with the same air one might reserve for appraising a teapot of suspicious vintage. In the very middle of it, my lord, said the sexton gravely. Right under the rood screen, if you please. Wimsey, ignoring the modest horror of the gathering villagers, crouched beside the body and observed the scene with a languid precision. He appears to have fallen mid-whistle. Observe the slight tension in the orbicularis oris. But why a tuning fork? Why here? And why, most curiously, is the man barefoot? Sergeant Griggs cleared his throat with the ceremony of a man preparing to be wrong. Might have been sudden, my lord. Epileptic or a spasm of the heart. Found the fork in his pocket, maybe, and dropped. Found it, did he? Murmured Wimsey. Funny place to go scavenging, the chancel. The constable bristled. No. Signs of foul play. That, said Wimsey cheerfully, is often the best sign of it. He stood and surveyed the church with narrowed eyes. The morning light filtered through the stained-glass saints with a queasy opalescence. Somewhere outside, a crow made the sort of sound that implies he's seen something damning and intends to report it when the time is ripe. Forgive me, Wimsey added, turning to the sexton, but unless the laws of ecclesiastical architecture have undergone revolution, you've placed the rood screen at least a rood too far west. The sexton turned a shade of affronted maroon. We adjusted it after the refurbishments, sir. Modern tastes and all. Wimsey nodded. Ah, yes. Modernity. The slow death of meaning. Well, then. He gazed once more at the dead man. A curious case. Whistling in a church. A tuning fork. In hand. Barefoot, smirking, and what's this? No mud on the soles. He bent to examine them. Not a speck. Odd, wouldn't you say, given the path from the cottage is ankle-deep in yesterday? The sergeant looked as though he would like to say many things, but none fit for peerage. Wimsey, twirling his monocle, turned to the vicar. Tell me, Reverend, did Mr. Damper have a fondness for hymnals, or just for harmony? The vicar blinked. He often quoted Psalms, and Blake. Wimsey brightened. Oh dear, that does complicate things. Any man who reads Blake in a church is bound either for sainthood or sedition. He straightened, smoothing his coat. "I think I shall linger here a day or two. A man's death should not go unexplained, even if he did confuse Ode to a Nightingale with the Book of Job. Which reminds me, has anyone checked the organ bellows for rat poison?" The villagers stared. Lord Peter Wimsey smiled. "Well," he said, "one must begin somewhere." The public house in Fenchurch St. Abel, with its low beams and odour of malted melancholy, was quieter than usual that evening. Lord Peter Wimsey, seated in the inn's least dusty armchair, turned over a small notebook in his fingers, with the absent dexterity of a man who could recite 12 lines of Horace while picking a locksmith's tumbler. Outside, the rain had returned, more like a mist pressing against the window panes than a storm, and the landlord was ostentatiously ignoring the murder by pretending it had not happened. "It is a curious thing," said Wimsey at last, "how the mind resists the illogical more than the horrible. We'll cheerfully accept a decapitation if it makes narrative sense, but a dead man whistling in a clean pair of feet confounds us entirely." Bunter, standing with the precision of a man employed not to move unless necessity demanded, said nothing. But he had already cleaned the soles of Mr. Damper's shoes in the kitchen scullery and made 3 discreet inquiries about his last known supper. Wimsey leaned forward. "Consider the position, Bunter. A man dies, presumably alone, in a church. He is found barefoot, but the path from his dwelling to the church is muddy enough to ruin a bishop's cassock. Yet no mud. His shoes are in his house. His door was locked from the inside. Ergo, someone moved him. But why? And more importantly, when?" Bunter inclined his head. "Perhaps the Reverend might shed some light on the habits of the deceased." "He might at that," said Wimsey, rising. "Time to make our ecclesiastical inquiries." The vicarage, a lopsided building that smelled faintly of damp hymnals and theological fatigue, was manned by the Reverend Lemuel Prowse, a man whose clerical collar seemed to pinch his thoughts as well as his neck. He greeted Wimsey with the mild alarm of a man unused to titled callers, and visibly regretted it upon recognizing his guest. "Lord Peter, yes, of course. The dreadful business. I do hope the presence of press and scandal can be avoided. We are a quiet parish." "Quiet indeed," said Wimsey, glancing at the vicar's volumes, "except for the occasional body in the nave. But tell me, what was your acquaintance with Mr. Damper?" The vicar sighed and gestured to a low-backed chair. "He came to services, sporadically. Odd sort of man. He repaired the organ once. Quite the expert on tuning. Said the music in most churches was flat both in sound and theology." "Sounds like a man of trenchant views," said Wimsey. "Any enemies? Feuds with bell-ringers, disputes with the vestry?" "None that I know of, but he kept to himself. Had some odd habits. Took walks at night, spoke to trees. Whistled. Even in service once, mid-sermon, said he couldn't help it." Wimsey's brow lifted. "He whistled in the middle of a sermon. What was the text?" "I was reading from Corinthians, on resurrection." "How dramatically inconvenient," said Wimsey. "And what of the tuning fork? I understand it was found in his hand." "Ah, yes. Well, he always carried it. Said the world was out of tune, and it was his business to remind it." "A metaphor, I assumed, or madness, or murder," said Wimsey lightly. "Tell me, Vicar, was he musical?" "He played no instruments, so far as I know, but he claimed to possess perfect pitch. Said the bells of St. Abel's were a quarter tone. Too low. A musical ear, a church out of tune, and a tuning fork in a corpse's hand. It has a certain grim symmetry." Wimsey rose. "Thank you, Reverend. And one more thing. Has the bell tower been used recently?" "Only for tolling. We told the death of Mrs. Maynard last Thursday." "Mrs. Maynard? I don't believe I've had the pleasure." "She was the widow in the black cottage by the mill stream. Damper attended the funeral, oddly enough, though he never knew her." "Ah," said Wimsey. "Funeral whistling again." The vicar's ears coloured. "So it was said, but I did not hear it. I was officiating." Back in the lane, the mist had thickened into a sort of falling breath. Wimsey strode through it with that peculiar combination of elegance and energy that made him appear immune to weather, gloom, or doubt. Bunter trailed respectfully behind, making occasional notes. 2 funerals in 1 week, Wimsey mused, both attended by Mr. Damper, both accompanied by unsolicited whistling. And in the end, our whistler himself is laid out like a psalm in D minor. Bunter ventured, "Might it be a case of obsession, my lord? A fascination with death?" "Possible. But then why the tuning fork? A man fascinated with death does not generally go about correcting the pitch of tolling bells." They arrived at the gardener's cottage. The constable on duty, yawning despite the gravity of the post, admitted them with a jerk of the head. Inside, the place was cold, clean, and peculiar. Whimsy moved slowly, touching nothing but observing everything. The hearth was swept. The books were few, technical manuals on acoustics and harmonics. The table bore the remains of a modest supper, half a loaf, a curl of cheddar, and a glass of milk. Whimsy peered into the glass, sniffed it, and set it down. "No signs of a struggle," he murmured. "No haste, no disorder. And here, his slippers, neatly aligned." He walked to the bedroom, glanced at the boots arranged below the bed. "And here we are, muddy souls, the only pair capable of bearing him to the church," he turned to Bunter. "And the path was wet yesterday evening, yes? It rained from approximately 4 to 8, my lord. So if he had walked, his boots would bear fresher mud, but they do not, which means they have not been worn since the day before. And yet he was found dead in the church this morning. Thus someone else must have conveyed him there," Bunter said quietly. "Unless he was murdered here and placed in the church." "Precisely. And now we must ask, why barefoot? Why remove the shoes? It serves no immediate theatrical purpose, unless the killer wished to suggest the victim arrived barefoot. But if that is so, why leave no trail at all? No footprints, no signs of dragging," Whimsy paced. "We are missing a detail, a mechanism, something absurdly simple." He paused at the sideboard and opened a drawer. Inside was a roll of parchment, inscribed with musical notation. He spread it open. It was a hand-drawn score, complex and exacting. Notes were annotated with times, and above the staves ran strange titles: A.M. Bell, 4 tollings. D-flat 10:05, peak resonance, rude crossbar. Whimsy stared, then chuckled softly. "Oh, Mr. Damper, you weren't mad, you were listening." Bunter looked over his shoulder. "A musical chart, my lord. A sound map of the church." He was mapping the acoustics by pitch and resonance. "Look, he's identified structural points where sound vibrates most intensely. The rude crossbar, why, that's precisely where he was found." "But why?" "To hear something," said Whimsy softly. "Something others could not, and that, I think, got him killed." He folded the parchment gently. "We must visit the bell tower." And in that moment, as the rain hissed against the shutters and the night dropped a silent veil across the village, Lord Peter Whimsy smiled the kind of smile that meant trouble for someone who had whistled the wrong tune at exactly the right time. The bell tower of St. Abel's was a cramped, shadow-haunted place, smelling of ancient wood, beeswax, and dust that had settled over centuries like a shroud. The narrow spiral staircase led upwards, each step creaking underfoot, as if the building itself whispered warnings to intruders. Lord Peter Whimsy ascended with the languid grace of a man who had, on occasion, tread similar perilous heights, not for fun, but for the resolution of puzzles no less knotty than this. Bunter followed, his face set in that discreet expression of polite curiosity he reserved for moments when his employer's thoughts appeared to be unfathomable. The bell rope swayed gently, though the bells themselves were at rest, silent sentinels waiting for the morrow's tolling. At the summit, Whimsy paused, eyes flicking over the bells arrayed in a semicircle. The largest, the tenor, loomed like a slumbering titan. Below them, the wooden floorboards bore scores of gouges and worn patches, as if many hands had passed this way. It was here, Whimsy thought, that Damper must have listened to the resonance he so obsessively charted. "Fascinating," said Whimsy, running a finger along the rim of one bell reverently. "This metal alloyed for tone and durability, yet the pitch is determined not just by the bell but by the structure supporting it." Bunter nodded. "The vicar mentioned a quarter-tone discrepancy in the bell tuning." "Yes, indeed," said Whimsy. And Mr. Damper's obsession was not with the bells themselves, but with the space, the way sound waves travel, reflect and resonate within this tower and the church beneath. He moved to a small panel of wood near the bells, where, A series of carved wooden blocks had been arranged with peculiar care. "Look here," he said. "A mute mechanism. These blocks can be moved to alter the tonal quality by dampening certain vibrations, a kind of rudimentary equalizer for the bells." Bunter peered closely. "Ingenious. More than that, it is the key to the timeline. If someone manipulated the mute blocks to silence or soften a particular bell at a certain hour, it would create an auditory illusion, meaning the bells rang differently than expected." "Precisely." Whimsy's eyes gleamed. "If Damper noticed the bell tolling out of tune, he would investigate, perhaps confront whoever was responsible. And if that someone wished to silence him—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the damp, dim air. "Descending the tower," Whimsy mused aloud. So our victim was both a meticulous observer and a meddler. He discovered a discrepancy, a manipulation of sound that might otherwise go unnoticed. And in a village where every hour is marked by the toll of these bells, that is a dangerous knowledge. They returned to the nave, where the body had been found, and Whimsy examined the spot beneath the rude crossbar. The polished floor betrayed no marks, no indication of struggle or movement, except a faint, almost imperceptible scuff near the victim's position. "Here," Whimsy said, kneeling. "A tiny abrasion, likely caused by a shoe's heel dragging ever so slightly on the floor." Bunter squinted. "Barefoot, my lord?" "Exactly. It is the only clue that someone moved him here after death. A killer, not content to let the body lie where it fell." He glanced towards the west window, where a pane stood slightly ajar. "Curious," he murmured. "An open window on a rainy morning." "Perhaps for ventilation," Bunter suggested. "Perhaps. Or a convenient escape route." Whimsy straightened, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Their next visitor was Mrs. Bridget Cole, housekeeper at the vicarage, and a woman whose sharp tongue was only matched by her sharper eyes. She greeted Whimsy with a mix of suspicion and curiosity, as though she wished him to be the first to uncover a truth she herself dreaded. "Mr. Damper was a queer one," she said, dusting her hands on her apron. "Had his habits like walking about barefoot in the churchyard at night, talking to himself and whistling tunes that gave me the creeps." "Whistling again," Whimsy observed. "Aye, that cursed whistle. Said it kept the evil at bay." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "Superstition? Could be, or madness. He was a loner, never spoke of kin or past. Said he'd heard bells ringing that no one else did." "And did he have enemies hereabouts?" "Not that I know, though some of the parish thought him odd. The miller complained about noises at night, said he saw shadows near the churchyard. But who knows? The village is full of old wives' tales." Whimsy smiled thinly. "Indeed. But as you say, shadows may conceal more than superstition." Later, Whimsy summoned Constable Rawlings, a diligent but unimaginative officer, whose enthusiasm was tempered by his lack of experience with mysteries beyond the usual brawls and poaching. "Constable," Whimsy said, "your timeline is critical. When was the body discovered?" "Just after 7, sir. Mrs. Wren came in to light the candles for morning prayers and found him." "And what was your procedure upon arrival?" "We sealed the church, sir, and began inquiries." "Good. Now, was there any sign of forced entry?" "None. Doors were locked from the inside, windows mostly shut except one near the altar." "Exactly," said Whimsy. "Now, can you confirm the weather conditions?" "Raining steadily. From 4 in the afternoon till after midnight. Thank you." "And did anyone hear bells tolling during that time?" "No. The bells were silent all evening." Whimsy's lips curved. "Ah, so the bells were not rung that night. Yet Damper's obsession was the sound of those bells. If he was killed because of them, might the silence itself be a clue?" The constable looked confused but nodded. Their investigation continued into the next morning, when Whimsy and Bunter interviewed several villagers, each seemingly more entrenched in the polite refusal to know than the last. The miller, a ruddy man named Thomas Gresham, was cagey. "Didn't see much, Lord Peter," he said, avoiding the eye. "But I heard odd noises near the church late. Couldn't rightly say what." "Whistling," Whimsy prompted. The miller flinched. "Maybe. More like someone calling to the wind." "And you did not investigate?" "No, sir. Thought better." "Of it?" Whimsy filed the statement carefully. Each interview added threads to the tapestry, but the image remained frustratingly blurred. At noon, Whimsy retired to the church porch, smoking a cigar with the half-detached air of a man watching shadows rather than people. Bunter sat nearby reading the local paper's account, which described the case with all the informed ignorance of provincial journalism. "Notice anything?" Whimsy murmured. Bunter looked up. "The article suggests an accidental death." A most convenient conclusion for those unwilling to look deeper. Accidental deaths do not whittle away at the very fabric of a village, do they? No, accidents are tidy, neat, and easily dismissed. Whimsy tapped ash into the tray. But murder has a habit of muddying the waters and muddling the minds of those who fear the truth. The afternoon brought a new and unexpected visitor, Miss Penelope Maynard, niece of the recently deceased Mrs. Maynard, who had been mentioned by the vicar. She arrived at the vicarage with a purposeful step and eyes bright with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "Lord Peter," she said with a sharpness that bespoke no ordinary grief, "I understand you are investigating Mr. Damper's death. I wish to speak to you." Whimsy inclined his head. "Please, Miss Maynard, do not hesitate." She settled in a chair with the ease of one accustomed to commanding attention. "I believe Mr. Damper's death is linked to my aunt's funeral. He was there, as you know, but something strange occurred that day. I heard the whistling myself. It was not random, it was a signal." "A signal?" Whimsy's interest piqued. "Yes, my aunt was a woman of some influence, with enemies old and new. The village, charming as it is, has shadows beneath its pleasant face." "And what, pray, did the whistling signal?" "That I do not yet know," she admitted, "but it was deliberate. An invocation, perhaps." Whimsy smiled faintly. "Invocation, yes, but of what kind remains to be established. You see, Miss Maynard, a whistler may rattle nerves and raise hairs, but it is the silence between notes that carries the true message." The day waned, shadows lengthened, and the village, as ever, wrapped itself in polite obscurity. But Lord Peter Whimsy, with Bunter and his growing pile of notes, was already assembling a picture far more intricate than the villagers dared admit. In the quiet moments before the vicarage lights were doused, Whimsy mused aloud. "The whistling is not madness nor mere superstition. It is language, coded, layered, and lethal. Our next step is to decipher its dialect. And so, beneath the Gothic arches and amidst the echoes of tolling bells, the mystery deepened, and the game grew ever more sinister." The chill of early evening had settled over the village like a thin, whispering veil, as Lord Peter Whimsy and Bunter stepped away from the vicarage and made their way along the damp lane back toward the heart of St. Abel's. The cobblestones glistened faintly under the soft glow of gas lamps, their light struggling against the encroaching shadows. The village seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for some inevitable revelation. "Miss Maynard's assertion of a signal," Whimsy said quietly, "is the key we must examine closely. If the whistling was a deliberate communication, it suggests a hidden layer beneath the village's genteel surface." Bunter nodded, adjusting his spectacles. "A message cloaked in melody, but to whom and why?" "Precisely," Whimsy replied. "We must find the language behind the notes." Mr. Damper was clearly versed in such subtlety, mapping sound frequencies, monitoring tonal shifts. His death followed quickly upon the funeral. He had discovered something that unsettled the wrong person. They paused at the village crossroads, where a small shopfront displayed an array of goods, old books, farming tools, and a few jars of honey, the amber glow beckoning through the window. Whimsy's thoughts drifted briefly to the local populace, each person a potential keeper of secrets, or a shadow hiding from them. "Let us return to the church at dawn," Whimsy suggested. "There, we can listen to the bells as Damper would. Have observe their voices and the spaces they inhabit." Bunter glanced up at the clouds, heavy with moisture. "A fine plan, my lord? Meanwhile, shall we seek the company of those who knew him? The villagers, perhaps the miller, or Mrs. Cole?" "Indeed. The more perspectives we gather, the more complete the picture." The evening deepened into night and the village doors began to close. Whimsy and Bunter made their way to the village inn, where the low murmur of conversation seemed reluctant to penetrate the pervasive stillness. The landlord, a stout man with a ruddy face and wary eyes, greeted them with the cautious civility of one accustomed to discreet whispers. "Evening, my lord. The talk is all of Mr. Damper's passing," he said, pouring a modest measure of ale. Some say it was his own doing, others whisper of foul play. Wimsey took the glass and nodded. "And what do you think?" The landlord shrugged. "I mind the whistling, sir. Not natural for a man to whistle on a funeral day, nor to be found. Dead with a tuning fork in hand. Strange times, these." "Very," Wimsey murmured. "Have you noticed anything unusual? Visitors, strange sounds, odd behavior?" The landlord thought for a moment. "Well, there was a man passing through. Last week, tall, lean, with a grey overcoat. Asked about the church bells, mentioned something about their tone being off. No one around knew his name." "Interesting," said Wimsey. "Did he stay long?" "Just a day, then left at dawn. Might have been a musician or an inspector, of some kind." Wimsey exchanged a glance with Bunter. A coincidence, perhaps, or a piece of the puzzle. The night deepened. At a nearby table, a group of villagers sat with lowered voices, glancing furtively toward the strangers. One, a wiry man with a scar above his eye, rose and approached Wimsey. "You're Lord Peter Wimsey, aren't you?" he said. "Name's Jenkins. I worked with Mr. Damper once. We didn't see eye to eye, but I know a thing or two." "Please," Wimsey said, gesturing to a chair. Jenkins sat down, eyes darting about as if afraid of being overheard. "Damper was obsessed with the bells, true, said they were tuned wrong and the church was cursed for it. He spent nights there, tinkering with the mechanisms, but he also found something else, something that scared him." "What was it?" Wimsey asked. "A sound, different from the bells, a kind of whisper. Some nights, when the wind was just so, you could hear voices. Voices. That didn't belong. Old voices calling out from the tower. Damper thought it was a message, maybe from the past." Wimsey folded his hands. "And did you believe him?" Jenkins shrugged. "I don't know what to believe. But I do know he wasn't mad. He was scared enough to keep it to himself." "Thank you, Jenkins. This is valuable." Wimsey turned to Bunter. "Our mysterious man with the grey coat might be linked to this whisper Jenkins speaks of. A sound outside the normal range, perhaps." Bunter nodded. "A spectral frequency, invisible to ordinary ears." The inn's clock chimed midnight. The villagers retreated to their homes, leaving Wimsey and Bunter alone with their thoughts and the murmur of rain beginning anew against the window panes. The next morning, before dawn had broken, Wimsey and Bunter returned to St. Abel's Church. The air was cold and damp, the mist curling about the ancient stones like the breath of ghosts. Inside, the nave was silent, save for the faint creak of settling wood. Wimsey's eyes shone with quiet excitement as he climbed the steps to the bell tower once more. Bunter followed, carrying a small portable phonograph Wimsey had insisted on bringing, a modern contraption for recording and analyzing sound. "The bells will toll soon," Wimsey said softly. Damper would have been here at this hour listening, measuring, marking the invisible. As the first pale light of dawn seeped through the stained glass windows, the bells began to toll, their voices resonant and rich. Wimsey listened intently, the phonograph capturing the sound. "Their pitch is altered," Wimsey observed. "The tenor bell sounds slightly flat, yet the mute blocks are in the position they should be." Bunter looked perplexed. "How can that be, my lord?" Wimsey paced the tower floor. "It means the source of the anomaly is elsewhere, in the structure, the materials, perhaps even the atmosphere." He knelt, running a gloved hand over the wooden beams. "This wood is damp. As expected, but look here, a fine crack almost invisible. If the bell's support is compromised, the vibration could shift subtly, changing the tone." "And would that explain the whisper Jenkins described?" Bunter asked. "Possibly. The crack could produce harmonics, faint sounds that blend with the bell's tolls. An eerie, human-like whisper, enough to frighten and unsettle." Wimsey's gaze lifted toward the village below. Mr. Damper was right to be concerned. The bells are out of tune, not by accident, but by neglect or design. They descended and returned to the village. Wimsey's mind was already weaving. The strands of his growing theory, an ancient secret locked in the bell tower's timbers, a sound that carried messages older than the village itself, and a man silenced for uncovering it. Back at the vicarage, A letter awaited them. It bore no signature, only a carefully folded sheet of manuscript paper, inscribed with musical notation interspersed with cryptic symbols. Wimsey recognized immediately it was Damper's work, notes and codes composed in sound rather than words. Wimsey studied the letter carefully, his eyes narrowing. "This is a cipher, Bunter. Damper was attempting to communicate something vital. The key lies in the relationship between the notes and the symbols." Bunter adjusted his spectacles again. "It resembles a form of solfège combined with alphanumeric. Coding?" "Exactly," said Wimsey. "A code to reveal a message hidden within the music, perhaps the secret that led to his death." He tapped the paper thoughtfully. "We are close, Bunter. Closer than before." That evening, as the village prepared to close its doors against the dark, Wimsey and Bunter began the slow work of decoding the musical cipher, unaware that eyes watched from shadowed corners and that the silence of the bells carried warnings, still to be heard. Lord Peter Wimsey settled into the vicarage's study, the room dimly lit by a flickering oil lamp that cast tall shadows over the stacks of manuscripts and scattered sheet music. Bunter, seated across from him, meticulously transcribed the cryptic notation onto a fresh sheet, his fingers steady despite the complexity before them. The air was thick with anticipation and something else, an indefinable tension, as if the house itself was holding its breath. "It is curious," Wimsey began, "how the simplest elements, bells, whistles, and a tuning fork, have led us into the tangled web of coded music. Damper was no ordinary man. He turned his obsession with sound into a language of secrets." Bunter looked up from his task, spectacles sliding down his nose. "Indeed, my lord, these symbols are no mere ornamentation. They seem to correspond, both to musical intervals and to letters, as if Damper devised a cipher interwoven with his tonal analyses." "Exactly so." Wimsey leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "If we assign each note a letter and each symbol a modifier, we might decode a message embedded within the musical structure, a message intended for a select few." They worked late into the night, cross-referencing solfège syllables with alphabetical equivalents, marking patterns that hinted at words buried beneath the melody. The process was painstaking, yet hypnotic, a rhythmic dance of logic and intuition. At last, as the clock chimed 2, a phrase emerged from the tangled symbols. "Beneath the tower's shadow, the truth lies silent." Wimsey allowed himself a rare smile. A riddle, but one more concrete than any whisper or ghostly wail. Bunter nodded thoughtfully. The tower's shadow, could it mean the church itself or something concealed nearby? "Both possibilities merit exploration," Wimsey replied, rising. "We shall return to the church at first light. The structure must yield its secrets one way or another." The morning dawned grey and overcast, with a persistent drizzle softening the edges of the village. Wimsey and Bunter made their way back to the church, the air cool and fragrant with wet stone and damp earth. The bell tower loomed above, its silhouette dark against the sullen sky. Inside, Wimsey inspected the tower's base, running his gloved hand along the stonework. The phrase suggests something hidden beneath the shadow, possibly underground. Bunter probed the surrounding. Ground eyes sharp for any irregularities. "There is a slight depression here, as though a cellar or crypt has been disturbed." Wimsey crouched, examining the damp earth. "A hidden compartment, perhaps? Damper could have discovered it and paid the price." They moved to the church's sacristy, a small room cluttered with vestments and ancient hymnals. Wimsey's gaze lingered on a brass plate near the floor, half covered by a faded rug. Kneeling, he pried it loose, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. "Just as I suspected," Wimsey murmured. "We must see what lies below." Lighting a lantern, they descended the stairs. The air grew colder and heavier, with each step thick with the scent of dust and neglect. At the bottom, they found a small stone chamber, its walls etched with faded inscriptions and archaic symbols. In the center, a wooden chest lay partially concealed beneath a tarpaulin. Wimsey approached cautiously, the lamp casting trembling shadows across the carvings. "Shall we?" Bunter asked, steadying his voice. Wimsey nodded. With care, he pulled back the covering, revealing the chest's weathered surface. The lock had been broken, recently, judging by the splinters. Inside were a collection of papers, some yellowed with age, others surprisingly fresh, bound in a leather folder stamped with an unfamiliar crest. Whimsy opened the folder, scanning the documents within. "They appear to be letters," he said. "Correspondence between a certain Archibald Damper and a figure named C.E. Possibly. A code name." Bunter peered over his shoulder. "The handwriting is terse, almost clinical." Whimsy read aloud a passage from one letter dated nearly a decade prior. "The alterations to the bells have caused unintended consequences. The harmonic interference disrupts the village's equilibrium. We must rectify this before exposure." "Alterations to the bells," Whimsy murmured. "Not a mere technical fault, but deliberate adjustments concealed behind a veil of tradition." Bunter pointed to another letter. "This one mentions a guardian of the sound and warns of the silence. That follows." "Most intriguing," Whimsy said. Damper was clearly entangled in something far larger than mere acoustics. As they sifted through the papers, a heavy knock sounded at the chamber door. Both men froze. The echo bounced ominously off the stone walls. "Who goes there?" Whimsy called, voice steady yet firm. No reply came. Whimsy exchanged a glance with Bunter before rising and opening the door a crack. Standing in the corridor was the village constable, flushed and breathless. "Beg your pardon, my lord," he said. "We received word from the vicar. There's been a disturbance at the rectory." Whimsy frowned. "What kind of disturbance?" The constable hesitated. "Someone tried to force entry. The door's been damaged, and signs suggest a search for these very documents." Bunter's eyes narrowed. "Then our presence here is known. We must be cautious." Whimsy nodded. "Very well, we'll return with haste, but first one final glance." He carefully replaced the chest's cover and ascended the stairs with Bunter close behind, minds racing. Outside, the village was cloaked in mist, the church bell tolling mournfully in the distance. The shadow of the tower stretched long across, the rain-slicked streets, as if reaching to grasp the truth hidden beneath. At the rectory, the vicar awaited them, pale and shaken, but composed. "Thank heavens you're safe," he said. "The intruder left no trace but this." He handed Whimsy a small folded scrap of paper bearing a crude scrawl. "Stop digging or join him." Whimsy studied the note, the faint scent of cigar smoke, clinging to the edges. A threat, then. The stakes have risen. The vicar glanced toward the looming church tower. "How you must find out what Mr. Damper uncovered, my lord, for the sake of this village and for justice." Whimsy lit a cigar, the dry British irony creeping into his voice as he exhaled a thin plume of smoke. "Indeed. Justice, like a finely tuned bell, demands precision and patience." Bunter offered a wry smile, and a keen ear for the faintest whisper. As the morning mist curled about the spires, Lord Peter Whimsy prepared to delve deeper into the village's secrets, knowing that each step forward might echo with peril, and that the melody of truth was yet unfinished. The weight of the threatening note pressed heavily on Whimsy's mind as he and Bunter left the rectory. The mist had thickened, wrapping the village in a muted shroud that swallowed sound and distorted familiar shapes. As they walked back toward the inn, the damp cobbles reflected the dull gleam of gas lamps, casting a sepia haze that lent an uncanny stillness to the streets. "Curious, isn't it?" Whimsy mused, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "The note's crude construction suggests haste or deliberate misdirection. Whoever penned it may wish us to believe they are a ruffian, when in fact they are a man of means and cunning." Bunter nodded, an attempt to intimidate by posing as the common villain. Classic misdirection. Precisely. Whimsy's fingers absently toyed with his cigar case. "Our unknown adversary prefers the cloak of shadows, yet exposes himself in the most conspicuous of ways." They reached the inn just as the morning hustle began to stir. Servants bustled about, preparing breakfasts, while the village's more permanent residents gathered in small clusters, discussing the latest gossip. Whimsy's mind was already elsewhere. Inside his room, he spread the letters and notes from the church chest across the table, methodically reviewing each in turn. Among them were several invoices for bell maintenance, detailed logs of modifications, and personal correspondence between Damper and an engineer named Clive Elridge, likely the C.E. referenced in the letters. "Clive Elridge, Whimsy," repeated softly. A man who, it seems, shared more than a professional interest in Damper's acoustic alterations. Perhaps the guardian of the sound was Elridge himself. Bunter looked up. The letters suggest a mounting tension between the two, particularly over the harmonic interference affecting the village. This wasn't merely a technical dispute, it seems. Yes, there's an undercurrent of something more personal, possibly ideological. Elridge appears to regard the church's bells as an instrument of purity, while Damper sought more experimental means. Their quarrel may have stirred dangerous resentments. Wimsey's eyes narrowed as he read a final note, its ink smudged, but legible. If the silence comes, it will be by design, not accident. The silence, Wimsey murmured, tapping the paper, a chilling phrase implying intentional sabotage or worse. As they contemplated these revelations, the inn's door creaked open, admitting the village doctor, Dr. Havisham. A man in his late 50s with a solemn countenance, he carried the air of one burdened by unwelcome knowledge. "My lord," the doctor greeted, nodding courteously. "I hear you have been busy this morning." "Doctor," Wimsey responded, "your timing is impeccable. We require your expertise on certain peculiar developments." Havisham's gaze flicked to the spread of papers. "I'm aware of the recent tragedy, of course. I must confess, I find the notion of acoustic sabotage quite unsettling." "Unsettling indeed," Wimsey gestured to the documents. Damper's obsession with sound was more than academic. It appears to have veiled something far darker. The doctor sighed deeply. "There is more. I was called to the rectory yesterday evening, shortly after the discovery of Mr. Damper's body." "And what did you observe?" Wimsey inquired. His death was sudden but odd. No obvious wounds, no sign of struggle. Yet he was ashen, his breathing shallow. "I suspect poisoning, but the precise agent eludes me." "Poisoning by a sound?" Bunter quipped half seriously. "Not by sound," Havisham replied, "but by something Damper may have brought upon himself through his own experiments. The possibility that the altered bell frequencies affected his health cannot be dismissed lightly." Wimsey's expression darkened. "A hypothesis worthy of consideration. Sound waves influencing physical well-being, unconventional but plausible if Damper's modifications introduced harmful resonance." "Exactly," Havisham said, "which raises the question, who else was privy to these experiments?" "An excellent question." Wimsey folded the letters carefully. "Elridge is an obvious candidate. We must learn more about his whereabouts and motives." The doctor nodded gravely. "I might provide assistance in that regard. Elridge visited the village frequently until recently, but since Damper's death, he has been conspicuously absent. Absence often speaks louder than words." Wimsey's tone was dry but cutting. "We shall pursue this lead forthwith." Later that afternoon, Wimsey and Bunter called upon the village's constable to inquire about Elridge. The officer, a burly man with a permanent scowl, seemed less than eager to cooperate. "Clive Elridge, not been seen in these parts for a fortnight, I'm told," he grunted. "Left no forwarding address. Some say he took fright after Damper's death." "Fright or flight?" Wimsey countered archly. "Did you investigate his departure with the usual thoroughness?" The constable shrugged. "We have our duties, my lord. Elridge's absence was not suspicious, until now, that is. Yet, the timing coincides precisely with the disturbance at the rectory and your claim of a search for the documents." Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "Tell me, officer, were any fingerprints found at the rectory?" "None that matched known village residents," the constable admitted reluctantly. "The intruder was careful or professional." So a stranger," Wimsey mused aloud. "Someone with knowledge of the documents and a desire to conceal their purpose." "Exactly," the constable affirmed. "But no clues beyond that." Wimsey's thoughts raced. The plot thickened. If Elridge had fled, why return now to threaten those investigating? And who else might be implicated? Bunter, ever the practical one, proposed, "Might it be prudent to canvass the villagers once more? An unknown visitor or unusual behavior might have been noted by the more observant locals." Wimsey agreed. "Indeed, we should revisit those who spoke with us earlier. There are always details overlooked when fear presses upon the heart." As twilight approached, they returned to the inn, ready to conduct a more discreet inquiry under the guise of casual conversation. The inn's common room was alive with murmurs and the occasional clatter of a game of whist. Wimsey selected his moment carefully, engaging Mrs. Pettigrew, the innkeeper's wife, in polite chat. She was a sharp-eyed woman whose lips twitched with amusement at the mention of strangers and odd comings and goings. "There's been talk, my lord," she confided in a hushed voice, "of a man seen near the church late at night, dressed in a dark coat and hat, always careful to keep his face hidden. Some say he might be Elridge or someone working for him." "Most enlightening, Mrs. Pettigrew. Did anyone see this man enter or leave the village?" "Not that I've heard, but old Tom, the ferryman, swears he saw someone crossing the river under cover of darkness the other evening. The figure was carrying a large case." "A large case, you say?" Wimsey's interest piqued. "Did Tom catch a glimpse of the person's face?" "No, my lord. Only the shape and the way he walked, steady, sure of himself." Wimsey nodded, absorbing every word. "And the time of night?" "Just past 10, according to Tom's reckoning." Curious indeed. Wimsey's gaze flickered toward Bunter, who had been quietly noting the details. "The timing corresponds to the moment the intruder must have left the rectory after the failed search." As the evening deepened, more villagers offered snippets of information. A locked cellar door found ajar, a misplaced tuning fork discovered near the riverbank, and the faint echo of a whistle carried on the wind at odd hours. Each detail seemed trivial in isolation, yet together they wove a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Wimsey retired to his chamber later that night, his mind alive with conjecture. The village, cloaked in fog and secrets, whispered its truths in fragments and shadows. Somewhere amidst the faint echoes and distorted melodies lay the key to the mystery. He lit a final cigar and leaned back, allowing his thoughts to untangle. The web of sound, silence, and human frailty. "The guardian of the sound," he murmured, "and the silence that follows. The dance of harmony and discord, life and death. Soon the final note will sound." The dawn broke with an uneasy stillness, as if the village itself were holding its breath in anticipation. Lord Peter Wimsey awoke with a clarity sharpened by the night's contemplations, the fragments of whispered rumors and mysterious clues, aligning slowly into a pattern of profound disquiet. His first act was to summon Bunter for a brisk review of their progress. "We have the shadow of Elridge drifting through the village like a ghost," Wimsey mused as he dressed. "But more pressing, the discovery of the tuning fork near the riverbank suggests that the acoustic experiments were not confined to the church. Someone has been carrying the instruments of resonance beyond the sacred walls." Bunter frowned. "And the locked cellar door found ajar, combined with the strange whistle heard at night. Could these be signs of a secret meeting place? Indeed, the possibility cannot be dismissed." Wimsey buttoned his waistcoat with measured precision. "It is as if the village harbors a hidden theater where the key players enact their clandestine drama. We must inspect these locations before the trail grows cold." The pair departed for the riverside, the morning mist lifting reluctantly to reveal a narrow, well-worn path flanked by ancient elms. The air carried a faint, eerie resonance, perhaps a memory of dampers tinkering with frequencies, or simply the echo of their own footsteps. Arriving at the riverbank, Wimsey examined the ground with meticulous care. The tuning fork lay half-buried beneath a scattering of leaves, its metallic prongs dulled but intact. Nearby, the earth bore faint impressions, too deliberate to be accidental. "Footprints," Wimsey observed. "Small and uneven, as if the bearer was cautious or perhaps burdened by secrecy." Bunter pointed toward the river's edge, where a small wooden jetty protruded into the water. Tom's ferry, presumably, an ideal place for clandestine crossings under the cloak of darkness. "A fitting stage for the whispers and shadows that haunt this village," Wimsey agreed. "We shall speak with Tom post-haste." The ferryman was a wiry man with weather-beaten features and eyes that darted like wary birds. When questioned about the mysterious passenger, his recollection was hesitant but vivid. "Didn't see much of him, sir." Dark coat, hat pulled low. He carried a case big as a coffin, or so it seemed. Never stopped to talk, just crossed the river, heading toward the old mill. "The old mill," Wimsey repeated thoughtfully, a site long abandoned, yet still standing. It has a reputation for eerie happenings, ghost stories and whispered curses. The perfect setting to breed suspicion. Yes, sir, folks avoid it at night. But if someone wished to conduct secret experiments, it would be a fitting place to avoid prying eyes. Whimsy nodded. Thank you, Tom, your vigilance is invaluable. As they left the jetty, a sudden flash of movement caught Whimsy's eye. Across the river, a figure retreated hastily into the trees, too swift to identify but enough to ignite his curiosity. The plot thickens, he remarked, eyes narrowing. A ghost fleeing from daylight. Back in the village, Whimsy's thoughts turned toward the cellar door that had been found ajar. The location was the rear of the local inn, where the proprietor, Mr. Grafton, kept storage for wine and provisions. There, among the barrels and crates, the air smelled faintly of damp earth and old timber. With permission, Whimsy and Bunter descended the narrow steps into the dim cellar. The flickering candlelight revealed an array of strange objects tucked away in the shadows, lengths of copper tubing, a cluster of glass bottles filled with dark liquids, and a small, intricately carved wooden box inscribed with peculiar symbols. A laboratory of sorts, Whimsy observed, examining the box with his characteristic blend of curiosity and detachment. Or perhaps a workshop for the creation of noise and silence. Bunter held up one of the bottles. Liquids of unknown composition. Could these be chemicals used in Damper's acoustic experiments? Very likely, Whimsy said carefully, placing the bottle back. The key question is who has access to this cellar, and for what purpose? The innkeeper, overhearing their conversation, appeared suddenly. I swear, gentlemen, I have no idea who might have left the door open. I am careful to lock it each night. Yet as we have seen, Whimsy replied mildly, even the most conscientious locks can be circumvented. His gaze fell upon a small scrap of paper pinned beneath a barrel. It was a torn fragment of a ledger, bearing a hastily scribbled note. Meet at midnight. Sound to be perfect. Midnight meetings, Whimsy murmured. Our nocturnal visitor has more to reveal, it seems. The day wore on with further interviews and quiet observations. Whimsy's inquiries led him to the village postmistress, Miss Halloway, a prim woman with a penchant for gossip and an eye for detail. Did you notice anything unusual about the letters or packages arriving in the past fortnight? Whimsy asked, his tone light but probing. Miss Halloway adjusted her spectacles, eyes gleaming. Well, there was a series of parcels marked with no return address delivered late at night. They contained strange devices, some kind of musical instruments, I believe. The postman was quite unsettled. Whimsy's interest sharpened. And who received these parcels? The name on the label was Damper, but several were addressed to Clive E., she replied. Quite mysterious, really. Indeed, Whimsy said, tapping his chin thoughtfully. A correspondence concealed beneath layers of anonymity. I wonder what symphony they composed. As dusk gathered once more, Whimsy returned to the rectory, where the rectory housekeeper awaited him with a cautious expression. My lord, she began, there is something you should see. After you left, I found a window in the study slightly ajar. It is one that should always remain closed. Whimsy's eyes twinkled with quiet triumph. The overlooked window. How curious that it escaped notice. Show me. They ascended to the study, a room cluttered with Damper's papers and instruments. The window overlooked the churchyard, and the cool evening breeze stirred the curtains. Remarkable, Whimsy said, approaching the sill. This window's latch has been tampered with, scratches on the wood as if forced open. And the garden below, the housekeeper added, is marked with footprints, muddy and fresh. Whimsy crouched to examine the prints. The sole patterns are unusual, small, narrow, and worn unevenly. They belong to someone accustomed to careful tread. Perhaps the nocturnal visitor, Bunter suggested from behind. Indeed. But whose footsteps echo in the silence of night, and what secrets do they carry? The answer, Whimsy knew, lay hidden in the interplay of light and shadow, sound and silence. The final note of this dark melody was drawing near, and the truth would resonate soon, loud and clear. With the village cloaked once more in creeping fog, Lord Peter Whimsy prepared to confront the phantom that haunted the bells and whispered through the wind, confident that the harmony of reason would soon unravel the discord of murder. The evening thickened as the fog coiled around the village like a serpent, blurring the boundaries between the known and the shadowed unknown. Lord Peter Wimsey, having mulled over the freshly uncovered clues in the rectory study, found himself drawn once more to the locus of the mystery, the churchyard, with its sombre stones and tangled undergrowth. There, amidst the whispering elms, he sought to unearth the quiet truths hidden beneath the village's polite surface. The footprints by the study window haunted his thoughts. Their pattern was peculiar, not merely from their narrowness, but the irregular wear suggesting a gait far from natural ease. They bespoke caution, but also purpose and perhaps a mind at odds with itself. What motive could lead a person to prowl the rectory garden under cover of night, risking detection for reasons unknown? Wimsey's mind turned to the tuning fork and the whispered stories of nocturnal sound experiments. The pieces seemed to form a troubling harmony. Bunter, ever the pragmatic assistant, joined his lord in the chilly dampness. "It strikes me, my lord, that whoever this is, they are deliberately weaving a web of distraction. The open window, the footprints, the tuning fork, they are the notes of a score composed to mislead. Ah, Bunter, but even a false note contributes to the overall symphony. We must listen carefully before we accuse. Their perambulations led them next to the old mill, that shadowy edifice whose reputation teetered between folklore and fact." The mill stood silent, a hulking presence of rotting wood and rusted iron, its windows' vacant eyes staring into the gloom. Here, Wimsey suspected, lay the true theatre of the mystery. He pushed open the heavy door, which protested with a creak that echoed through the empty chamber. Dust motes floated in the narrow beams of lantern light as they explored the ground floor. Scattered among the debris were shards of glass, remnants of what might once have been laboratory apparatus, now broken and inert. "There is more than mere superstition at work here," Wimsey observed, stooping to examine a fragment. "This site was used recently and not for simple milling." A faint, persistent hum vibrated through the air, faint yet unmistakable. Wimsey's keen ear caught it immediately. "Do you hear that, Bunter? A resonance, barely audible, but there. Perhaps from a hidden device, still operating." They followed the sound to a concealed alcove beneath the staircase, where a panel had been removed to reveal a small cavity housing a mechanical contraption. It was an intricate assembly of gears, wires, and glass tubes, evidently designed to emit controlled vibrations. The apparatus that Damper and this mysterious Clive E. used to manipulate sound, Wimsey concluded. But why here? And what was their ultimate purpose? Bunter's gaze fell on a stack of papers tacked to the wall, scribbled diagrams, notes on frequencies and acoustic dampening, alongside cryptic references to resonance zones and sonic thresholds. The two men pored over the documents, piecing together a scientific puzzle that hinted at experiments far beyond mere academic curiosity. Suddenly, a noise, a soft footfall, echoed from above. Both men froze, eyes locking in silent communication. Slowly, Wimsey ascended the rickety staircase, Bunter close behind. At the top, a narrow loft overlooked the mill's cavernous interior, and there, in the gloom, stood a solitary figure. "Clive," Wimsey said softly, stepping into the lantern light. The man turned sharply, eyes wide with surprise and something else, fear, guilt. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice trembling. "This place, it's dangerous." "Dangerous." "Yes," Wimsey agreed, "but no more so than the secrets you seek to bury. Tell me, Clive, what are you doing with these devices? What was your relationship to Reginald Damper?" Clive's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. "We were partners once, friends even, but the experiments, they took a toll. We disagreed about how far to push. Reginald became obsessed. He believed sound could reveal truths hidden by death itself. Ghosts, spirits, he chased the impossible." "Ah, the siren call of the supernatural," Wimsey said dryly. "And yet you suspect the cause of his death was no spectral visitation." Clive nodded. "No, it was something more earthly. Jealousy, betrayal, fear." "What fear, precisely?" The man hesitated, then confessed in a low voice. "Reginald discovered a secret about the village, something that threatened powerful people. He planned to expose it, to use his experiments to unmask lies and deceit. But someone wanted him silenced. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. And this someone, do you have an idea who? Clive shook his head. Only shadows, but the tuning fork found by the river, the broken glass in the mill, they're signs that others continue his work or are covering their tracks. As Clive's words settled, a sudden crash sounded from below. The mill's door slammed shut and footsteps pounded on the stairs. The loft door rattled violently. "Hide!" Whimsy whispered urgently, pulling Clive into the shadows. A figure appeared at the stairwell's base, a bulky man, face obscured by a thick cap, wielding a lantern that cast wild light. "I told you all to stay away," he growled. Whimsy stepped forward calmly. "A night visit, Mr. Marlowe. Surely you have better things to do than menace innocent investigators." The man scowled. "Curiosity killed the cat, Lord Peter. You should leave before you get hurt." "On the contrary, I'm here to find the truth," Whimsy replied with quiet steel. Marlowe hesitated, then lowered the lantern slightly. "Truth? In this village?" "Sometimes, Lord Peter, the truth is a dangerous burden." "Then let us see. Who bears it, and who hides behind shadows?" Whimsy said, fixing Marlowe with a steady gaze. The tension thickened, broken only when the cellar door banged open behind them, and a second figure emerged. Miss Halloway, clutching a bundle of papers. "You're needed back at the rectory," she said breathlessly. "There's been another development." Without waiting, Whimsy followed her, Clive trailing reluctantly and Marlowe retreating with a wary glance. Back at the rectory, the household was in disarray. The vicar's study, previously tidy, was now overturned, drawers pulled out, papers scattered, as if someone had been searching frantically for a missing piece of the puzzle. Whimsy knelt to examine the floor near the overturned desk. There, half hidden beneath a torn manuscript, lay a curious object. A small tarnished salver, its surface scratched but unmistakably significant. "An overlooked detail," Whimsy murmured, lifting the salver. "This belongs to the vicar's collection, yet it vanished after the murder. And now it reappears amid the chaos." He turned to the assembled household. "Who among you has knowledge of this object's disappearance?" Silence fell, broken only by the creak of the old house settling. Then from the corner a soft voice. "I saw it taken, my lord, but I dared not speak." It was the housekeeper, her eyes wide with fear. "It was Mr. Marlowe. He came in the night searching." "Searching for what?" Whimsy asked. "For documents, evidence perhaps, something to do with Reginald's experiments and the secret he uncovered." Whimsy nodded slowly. "Then it seems our mystery grows deeper still. There is a web of secrecy and fear that entangles us all." With the salver as the newest thread to unravel, Lord Peter's mind raced. The timing, the missing objects, the hidden experiments, all pointed to a truth more tangled than any ghost story or village superstition. As the fog curled once more around the rectory windows, Whimsy understood that the next step must be one of cunning and precision, a theatrical reveal to catch the shadows in their own trap. And so the stage was set for the confrontation that would finally pierce the village's veil of silence. The night deepened into an almost tangible presence, thick with the damp scent of earth and the distant murmur of restless waves against the cliffs. Inside the rectory, Lord Peter Whimsy settled into his accustomed position by the fire, the flickering flames casting long, quivering shadows upon the walls, shadows that seemed to dance mockingly, as if privy to secrets not yet revealed. The household gathered, a reluctant and nervous audience to the performance about to unfold. The vicar, pale and trembling, sat near the window, his fingers nervously twisting a handkerchief embroidered with the parish crest. Miss Halloway, the sharp-eyed governess, perched at the edge of a chair, her expression taut with anticipation. Clive, still shaken but resolved, lingered near the door, while Bunter busied himself with tea, ever the unruffled foil to his lord's theatrical inclinations. Whimsy, his brow slightly furrowed beneath the touch of a neatly trimmed moustache, began with a deliberate cadence. "We find ourselves in possession of a most curious object, the tarnished salver, displaced from its rightful place among the vicar's possessions, yet returned at the moment of greatest confusion. This, dear friends, is no mere coincidence, but a piece of a carefully orchestrated puzzle. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle, then produced from his pocket a small folded sheet of paper, one of the documents recovered from the mill. The notes of Reginald Damper, or rather the fragments we have managed to salvage. They speak not only of acoustic experiments, but of a design to unmask the hidden voices of those long departed, to shatter silence itself. A murmur rippled through the group, but Whimsy raised a hand. "Fear not, for I assure you no spirits haunt these halls. The true ghost is of a more terrestrial nature, jealousy, fear, and the instinct for self-preservation. Now, let us examine the chronology. That has so far eluded the eager grasp of the constabulary." With a slender finger, Whimsy traced the outline of a timeline on a sheet of paper, marked with hours and locations, Damper's last known movements, the suspicious comings and goings of Mr. Marlowe, and the curious absence of Clive E. from the village during the critical hours. Notice how the clocks, oddly enough, were misaligned that evening, one advanced by 7 minutes, another slow by nearly the same amount. A trivial detail, you might say, yet it provides a crucial window of alibi manipulation. He turned his gaze sharply toward Marlowe, who had been silent but watchful. "Mr. Marlowe, your protestations of innocence ring hollow when set against such precision. You sought to fabricate an impossible timeline to disguise the true sequence of events." Marlowe's jaw tightened. "I sought only to protect what little remained of my reputation, Lord Peter. Our reputation, a fragile and dangerous commodity, as I well know." Whimsy's tone carried a faint mockery, but beneath it lay unyielding resolve. "Tell us then, why did you come to the rectory that night? What were you searching for in such a reckless manner?" The man's eyes flickered with a hint of desperation. "I feared the truth about the village's past, and Reginald's intention to expose it would bring ruin. I acted to prevent that." "Prevent by silencing him," Whimsy said quietly. "Yet it was you who left the window ajar in the study, not the victim himself." A sudden intake of breath from Clive E. prompted Whimsy to shift his gaze. "And you, Clive, absent during the crucial hour, returning with a tale of secret, meetings and whispered threats. What role did you play in this tragic drama?" Clive's face paled. "I was afraid of Reginald's obsession, of what his revelations might cause. I intended no harm. But I confess I did move the salver to protect some notes I feared would be misused." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "The salver, then, a symbol and a tool, displaced to conceal knowledge, only to return at the moment of reckoning. It is the tangible proof of a desperate effort to hide the truth." He stepped toward the hearth, lighting a slender cigarette and drawing a slow, contemplative puff. "Now the final piece, the soundproof door in the mill, the tuning fork, and the inexplicable whistles heard in the dead of night. They are not the work of spirits, but of a man driven by control, to manipulate perception and silence dissent." Eyes narrowed, Whimsy addressed the room. "The killer sought to stage a supernatural scare, to cloak a murder in the guise of ghostly retribution, ensuring suspicion would fall on ancient curses rather than human hands." The vicar gasped softly. "But who could do such a thing?" Whimsy's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. "The person with the most to lose, the deepest grudge and the most intimate knowledge of the village's secrets." Turning sharply, he fixed Marlowe with a gaze that brooked no denial. "You, sir. Your threats to the vicar, your nocturnal intrusions, your efforts to obscure the timeline, all betray the hand that struck the fatal blow." Marlowe's face twisted with rage, then collapsed into weary defeat. "Yes, it was I. But you must understand. Reginald's discovery would have ruined us all. I acted to protect my family, my heritage." "Oh, the age-old justification," Whimsy said with a sardonic smile. "Murder as an act of preservation." Marlowe shook his head. "I never wished to kill, only to frighten." But he stumbled in the struggle, and that it was an accident. Whimsy's expression softened slightly. Yet an accident born of choice, a failure to confront truth with courage. As constables entered to take Marlowe into custody, Whimsy turned to the assembled household. "And so the truth, like a candle flickering in the darkness, has been revealed, not in ghostly wails or arcane rites, but in human failings, fear, jealousy, and the desperate need to control one's own destiny. He lit another cigarette, the smoke curling upward like a ribbon of fading mystery. Remember, my friends, the shadows we fear often have very earthly origins, and the dead speak only when the living dare to listen. With a final, arch glance, Lord Peter Wimsey gathered his coat and hat, his silhouette framed against the lingering gloom of the rectory. Now, if you will excuse me, I must seek a quieter place, and perhaps a better cigar. And so, leaving behind a village slowly, emerging from its veil of silence, Wimsey stepped into the foggy night, the faint echo of his footsteps mingling with the last whispers of a tale well told. The dawn crept hesitantly over the moors, casting a pale light that seemed reluctant to penetrate the heavy shadows still clinging to the village. Lord Peter Wimsey, cigarette stub still smouldering in the ashtray beside his chair, reflected quietly on the night's revelations. The stillness of the rectory, now relieved of its earlier tension, was almost suffocating, a stark contrast to the cacophony of human frailty and deception uncovered in mere hours. Wimsey's mind, ever the forge of reason amid the chaos of passion and fear, revisited the final moments of the investigation. The carefully woven fabric of alibis, the deliberate misdirection of the clocks, the calculated placement of the salver, all converged into a narrative of human weakness and desperate cunning rather than supernatural fancy. The village, with its veneer of pastoral calm, had concealed a tempest of jealousy, secrets, and the fatal desire to preserve one's legacy at any cost. Bunter entered quietly, his face composed but eyes bright with the unspoken questions of the household. "My lord, the constables have secured Mr. Marlowe's belongings. They found this among his papers." He handed over a bundle of notes, tied with a ribbon, their edges worn and smudged. Wimsey unfurled the pages, scanning the file. Elegant but troubled handwriting. It was a journal, chronicling Marlowe's escalating dread at Reginald Damper's discoveries, references to old grievances, ancestral disputes, and a growing fear that the mill's acoustic experiments would expose long-buried scandals. There were sketches of the mill's layout, precise notes on soundproofing, and even a list of village residents who had reasons to fear the past being unearthed. "Here lies the heart of the matter," Wimsey murmured. Marlowe's motive was less a spur of passion and more a slow-burning dread. The fear of disgrace, the horror of ancestral sins brought to light, drove him to orchestrate a deception so intricate it almost succeeded. Bunter nodded, pouring a fresh cup of tea. And yet the accident, his failure to anticipate Damper's resistance, sealed his fate. "Indeed," Wimsey agreed, folding the journal with care. "It is a sobering reminder that the thirst to control one's narrative can lead to ruin. But what remains curious, Bunter, is the village's reaction, a collective silence, a reluctance to speak of old wounds. The villagers cling to their secrets as if to a life raft, my lord," Bunter observed quietly. "The past is a dangerous place for them." Wimsey's gaze drifted to the window, where the first hesitant rays of sunlight caressed the dew-laden fields. This case, while resolved in its immediate tragedy, leaves lingering questions. How many other quiet tragedies lie hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the wrong note to be struck? The door creaked softly and Miss Halloway entered, her expression grave but resolute. "Lord Peter, I have taken the liberty of speaking with the vicar's wife. She has requested a word with you in private." Wimsey raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A confidant seeking counsel, always a promising development. Lead the way." In the modest parlour, Mrs. Marlowe awaited, her hands tightly clasped as if holding on to composure itself. Her eyes, though weary, held a spark of determination. "Lord Peter, I must thank you for unveiling the truth, painful though it is. But there is more, something I feared to speak aloud until now." Wimsey inclined his head, encouraging her. "Please, Mrs. Marlowe," she hesitated before continuing. "Reginald Damper was not only investigating the mill's acoustics, he was on the verge of uncovering a hidden ledger, records of transactions that implicated several prominent families in illicit dealings, some dating back decades. The implications could shake the very foundation of this community." Wimsey's interest sharpened. Financial misconduct, then? Or something darker? Both, I fear, she said. Blackmail, bribery, and the silencing of inconvenient voices. Damper's death may have spared some scandal, but at what cost to justice? The detective nodded thoughtfully. The social fabric here is more tangled than I anticipated. It appears that Reginald's scientific curiosity threatened not only the past, but also the fragile equilibrium maintained by mutual complicity. Mrs. Marlowe sighed. And so the village clings to silence, preferring shadows over exposure. Whimsy tapped his fingers against the table. A common, if lamentable, human failing. Yet silence is a poor substitute for truth, and the ghosts of past misdeeds will eventually rise. As he prepared to leave, the vicar's wife pressed a folded envelope into his hand. For your discretion, Lord Peter, evidence Reginald entrusted to me should you need it. Stepping back into the chill morning air, Whimsy felt the weight of the village's secrets pressing upon him. The surface tranquility belied a reservoir of human complexity and concealed transgressions that no single solution could fully resolve. Yet justice, as always, demanded illumination. The journey back to London promised reflection, and perhaps a measure of relief that order had been restored, if only temporarily. But as the train sped through rolling countryside, Whimsy's thoughts lingered on the villagers, on their fear, their loyalty, and their frailties. In the end, he mused, the greatest mysteries are not those of murder or deceit, but of the human heart, capable of both kindness and cruelty in equal measure, and forever cloaked in the delicate guise of civility. With a final glance toward the fading silhouette of the rectory, Whimsy lit a cigar, drawing deeply on its smoky comfort. The man who whistles at funerals, he murmured to himself. A man who laughs to hide his tears. And so the case closed with a quiet poignancy, leaving behind a tale of logic, loss and the fragile dance between truth and silence, an echo of humanity's eternal paradox. The drawing-room at Harrowby Rectory was bathed in the soft glow of an evening fire, the flames flickering like shadows of the long night's secrets. Lord Peter Whimsy stood near the hearth, his posture impeccably composed, though his eyes held the familiar gleam of restrained triumph. Around him, the assembled company, villagers, clergy, and the few remaining members of the Damper household watched, in attentive silence. The hour for revelation had come. Whimsy began, his voice measured, laced with that arch yet precise tone that bespoke both erudition and irony. It is a truth universally acknowledged, I believe, that a murder committed in the shadow of ancestral pride seldom arises from mere impulse. Rather, it is the slow accretion of dread, resentment, and a desperate need to control one's narrative that precipitates such tragedies. He gestured toward Reginald Damper's meticulously kept notes and the journal recovered from the late Mr. Marlowe. Mr. Marlowe's increasing anxiety over the discovery of certain inconvenient truths within this village is no secret. His fixation on the acoustic peculiarities of the mill, a curious preoccupation indeed, served as a smokescreen for a far more pressing concern. The potential exposure of long-concealed financial and moral malfeasance among those once thought above reproach. Eyes flickered uneasily among the listeners. Whimsy continued. The so-called accident was anything but. The displacement of clocks, the subtle soundproofing, even the odd placement of that silver salver, these were deliberate manipulations, intended to create confusion, to construct an alibi as impenetrable as the stone walls of this rectory. He fixed his gaze on one figure in particular, the impeccably mannered Mr. Aldridge, who had so carefully crafted his persona of concerned friend and loyal confidant. Mr. Aldridge, you underestimated the persistence of a curious mind. Your careful orchestration of the timelines and your manipulation of the village's collective silence might have delayed the inevitable, but you could not escape the logic that underpins all human actions. A faint flush rose to Aldridge's cheeks, his lips pressed into a thin line. Whimsy pressed on with gentle inexorability. You feared the revelation of the ledger, the exposure of your financial entanglements and those of your allies. Your attempt to silence Mr. Damper was born not of passion, but of cold calculation, a desire to preserve your standing at any cost. The room was taut with tension. Aldridge's composure faltered, a brief glance exchanged with an unseen accomplice. Whimsy's voice softened just enough to invite confession rather than confrontation. It is the very human flaw of hubris that leads men to believe they can outwit truth indefinitely. Aldridge's facade cracked, his voice barely a whisper. You have no proof, only suspicion. Proof, Whimsy replied, indicating the envelope Mrs. Marlowe had entrusted to him, in the form of ledgers, correspondence, and confessions extracted from those burdened by guilt and fear. The intricate web of deceit has been unraveled. There was no dramatic outburst, no desperate flight, only the quiet acceptance that comes when logic has finally eclipsed deception. Aldridge sank into his chair, defeated. Whimsy turned to the others, a faint smile playing on his lips. Justice in this case is less a matter of punishment than a restoration of truth and an admonition against the perils of silence. As the gathering dispersed, murmurs of relief mingled with lingering unease. The village's secrets had been laid bare, yet the cost was evident in the hollow eyes and tentative glances exchanged among old friends. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of a whistle, an eerie human sound that might have been sorrow, or perhaps a desperate attempt at levity in the face of grief. Whimsy, lighting a fresh cigar, mused quietly. A man who whistles at funerals is a man who understands the absurdity of life as much as its tragedy. With that he took his leave, his figure disappearing into the night, leaving behind a village forever changed by the weight of truth and the subtle balance between justice and mercy.